My name's Joe. This was after a casual drink with my colleagues at the end of the workday. I think it was a little past 8 o'clock at night. Just as I was about to enter the convenience store near my house, a young girl came out there. The smell of shampoo wafting from her hair was so incredibly strong that I half turned my head and followed her with my eyes. Sure enough, I knew her. She lived in the apartment building across from mine. Though we had never spoken, we would give each other a nod if we happened to see each other in front of our apartments. She had a short haircut with a little flip at the ends. I'm not great at understanding women's hairstyles, but it seemed to be called a mullet hair. I thought she was a college student, probably in her early 20s. She wasn't flashy, but had a kind of soft, approachable, and cute face. Usually, she was well dressed, but that night, she was in a tracksuit unusually. She staggered down the street at night, weighed down by the plastic bags she carried in both hands. After I finished at the convenience store and entered the alleyway to my apartment, I saw her not far ahead, standing still with 2 plastic bags at her feet. One of the bags had ripped open under the weight of its contents. "What's wrong?" I asked. When I called out, she looked up at me with a pleading expression. "It's just heavy." Following her words, I looked at the bags on the ground. Each bottle contained 4 2-gallon of mineral water, 8 in total. I thought it was a rather hefty purchase and decided to lend a hand. "I'll carry half of it. You live in that apartment building over there, right?" "Yes, but are you sure?" I assured her it was no problem, although I was a bit bothered by the overpowering smell of her shampoo. As we walked along carrying the bags full of water bottles, I asked about the situation. About an hour ago, she had been using the shower at home. Just as she started washing her hair with shampoo, the hot water stopped. She had only planned on showering, so the bathtub was empty. She wiped off the shampoo suds with a bath towel as best she could, and then stepped out of the bathroom in her tracksuit. So she hadn't rinsed off the shampoo. That's why the smell was so intense. I nodded in understanding, feeling strangely satisfied with her explanation. Despite this, her story continued. Just as she stepped out of the bathroom, the doorbell rang. It was her neighbor, checking to see if her water was also out. It turned out the water was out in all the apartments, and everyone started making a fuss. Someone called the property management company who managed the building. When they came to check, it turned out to be a problem with the water tank. They called a professional to repair it, but it couldn't be fixed that night, and so, everyone had to spend a night without water. That's why she had gone to buy bottled water at the convenience store. I helped her carry the water bottles up to her room. She thanked me repeatedly, looking quite embarrassed. "That's quite a disaster. Must feel awful with your hair full of shampoo." At my words, she put her hand on her own head. "Yes, so, after buying the water, I thought I'd boil some and wash it out." As she said this, something flashed in her mind, and her eyes lit up. "Right, there's a spot on the street past the convenience store, isn't there? Maybe I'll go there. It's been a while since I last visited a spa. I wouldn't usually." I nodded, turned on my heel to leave, and then remembered something. Remembered and turned back to her. "That spa, it's closed on Tuesdays." Her hand, which was inserting the key into the lock, suddenly stopped. Then she looked at me with her mouth gaping. There weren't any other internet cafes or the like where she could use a shower in this neighborhood. "If you'd like, you can use mine. It's old, but I keep it clean, so it's not dirty." She lived in what you might call a fancy designer condo. In contrast, I lived in a 40-year-old, 2-story wooden apartment building. At best, it was of a retro design, but simply put, the decay was severe. It was a rickety old apartment. but I liked it. There wasn't any particular inconvenience, and the location was good. My room was on the second floor, and it got decent sunlight. And above all, the rent was by far the cheapest in this area. I even doubted whether it was a crime scene when I first moved in. The layout of the room was such that as soon as you entered the front door, the kitchen, about the size of a small dining room, was to the right and a bathroom unit was to the left, and there was just one larger room in the back. She was a little hesitant about my invitation, but losing to the unpleasant feeling of her hair, she eventually came to borrow the shower. She came to my room with a fearful look on her face, looked around with a curious look on her face, and then entered the bathroom. Immediately, I heard the sound of hot water running and pitter-pattering from the shower. I felt as though I was listening to a sound I shouldn't be hearing. So, I turned on the TV in a hurry. Thanks to you, I feel refreshed. I'm glad I could be of help. Exchanging these words, I saw her off from the doorway. A few days later, in the area where my apartment is located, there was a prior notice that due to power supply demand tightness, a planned power outage would be implemented for about 2 hours from around 7 p.m. It may be inappropriate for me to say this, but I was looking forward to a little taste of what a power outage would be like, if only for a couple of hours. And at exactly 7 p.m., it became pitch dark outside the window. The lights in my room remained on. Wondering what was going on, I went outside of the apartment. It turned out that even though this whole area was said to be affected, my apartment was excluded, and the power outage had occurred up to the other side of the narrow lane. I was left a bit surprised, not knowing whether to be happy or disappointed. Then, she came out of the condo across the street, which was affected by the power outage. When I greeted her, she also bowed her head, saying, "Thank you for the other day." And then she sighed and said, "It's a power outage this time. It's so annoying, and I have an exam tomorrow." She had heard the notice about the planned power outage, but it seemed like she was sure it would be cancelled. But still, taking the previous water outage as a lesson, she had stored some water. In cases where water tanks are used in condos, water is sent to each room using electricity, so if there is a power outage, water will also stop. And when the power really went out and the lights turned off, she thought she would try to imagine the exam questions in the dark, almost like a meditation. She was thinking about making some tea to calm down. But my place is fully electric, so not only do the lights not turn on, but I also can't get water or heat water. And so, far from calming down, she became frustrated and decided to go to a fast food restaurant near the station to study. I was about to tell her that in my room, the lights are on and I can heat water, but I decided not to. Instead, I said, "Well then, good luck, take care," and saw her off. Then, the next evening, when I was returning from work and about to leave the station, I saw her arguing with the station staff inside the ticket gate. "Good evening. Is something wrong?" "Oh, Joe." I didn't remember introducing myself to her, but maybe she had seen my nameplate when she came to borrow my shower. "I don't have enough money for the train fare." "Train fare? How much?" she answered with a face that looked like the world was ending. 80 cents. 80 cents. Nowadays, 80 cents. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. But anyways, I lent her the money anyway. She successfully exited the train station and headed home with me. "I think I dropped my phone in the train," she said. She's always been one to go cashless, paying with her phone wherever she went. Of course, she carried a bit of cash too. But that day, she had just finished her college exams and had an early dinner with her friends to celebrate. The restaurant they entered only took cash, and she used up most of the cash she had. Then she took the train, but she used her phone as her train pass as well. She was able to go through the ticket gate when she boarded the train with her phone, but after she got off, she lost her phone and couldn't get out of the station. When she explained the situation to the station staff, they checked for lost items, but told her, "We have no matching reports yet. You can either wait a little longer or hope that the train crew finds it when the train she was on goes back to the garage." Regardless, she had to pay the train fare. It was okay to self-report the station she got on at. She should have just said she boarded from the next station, but she honestly answered. As a result, the fare from that station was 80 cents more than what she had left in her wallet. If she had a debit card, she could have withdrawn cash from the ATM on campus, but she always left her debit card at home and relied on her phone. The next morning, she came to visit me, out of breath, as I was leaving for work. She had withdrawn cash from the ATM at a convenience store last night. Since she didn't have a landline at home, she searched for a public phone in the neighborhood and just contacted the railway company. Then she found out that her phone was stored as a lost item. "So I'm going to go pick it up now." Saying that, she ran off, then came back to me as if she remembered something, and paid me back the 80 cents I lent her yesterday. Watching her leave, I couldn't help but laugh. I felt like I had become her uncle or something. Then, next weekend, while I was shopping at a nearby supermarket and checking out, I spotted her at the next register. She was, unlearned, paying with her phone again. After checking out, I approached her at the batting station and spoke to her. "Hello, are you shopping?" She looked surprised for a moment, but as soon as she recognized me, she smiled and said, "We've been running into each other a lot lately, haven't we? Maybe we just didn't notice each other before. We might have been passing by each other all the time." We left the supermarket and walked home together. Lately, I've been really unlucky. Remember the water cut off and the scheduled power outage the other day, and dropping my phone and the train fare? She looked up in the sky and shook her shoulders back and forth in a bored manner. "I'm really fed up. I failed my college exam, and I made a mistake at my part-time job and got scolded. And the other day when I was walking on the street, I even got pooped on by a crow." I chuckled through my nose. Hey, we all have times like that. Suddenly, she got an idea and said, "Hey, Joe, can I use your kitchen today?" I said okay, but asked why, and she answered, the reason she hasn't been lucky lately is because of the apartment she's living in. Since she moved there, she feels like her luck has turned bad. "I'm not good at cooking, but I'm good at making omelets. But the apartment I'm living in is all electric with an induction heater." She said that with an induction heater, she couldn't make an omelet the way she wanted. I thought blaming it on the tools was a bit much. Maybe it's a kind of exorcism. If I can make a good omelet with gas, maybe I'll move to a place that's not all electric. I didn't expect the word exorcism to come out of her mouth. Sure, why not? Give it a try, I'll taste it for you. The omelet she made turned out overcooked and hard, far from delicious. Several more days passed. A major hurricane was approaching, and the company ordered us to finish work early. Just after 4 p.m., I left the office and got on the train for home. As predicted, the weather was threatening, with strong winds blowing and ominous, thick rain clouds hanging in the sky. I did some shopping at the usual supermarket on the way home and hurried back to my apartment. When I got there, she was sitting alone in a squatting position in front of my door. "What are you doing? Is something wrong?" I asked. She looked up with a sad face and told me that a group of friends from her college club, who she was very close with, had organized a mixer a few days ago. She found out today that she was the only one not invited. She said she felt left out. What a foolish thing to worry about. Well, that's youth for you, I said, laughing off the situation. Anyway, the wind is getting stronger and it's starting to rain. The storm is coming. You should go home. Or would you like to come in? To my surprise, she said she would like to come into my apartment. The storm was getting closer, and the wind and rain were intensifying. My 40-year-old poorly constructed apartment was making all sorts of creaking and groaning noises. She looked anxious the whole time. She probably has never heard such noises in her fancy apartment. Are you going to eat with me? I'm making fried rice for dinner. I called out from the kitchen. She happily accepted the offer and came to the kitchen. I placed the frying pan on the gas stove, added some oil, and started tossing in the ingredients one by one. With a swift backward pull, I tossed the fried rice in the air with the pan. "Wow, you are good. Can I try?" she asked. I handed over the pan to her, who was very motivated. She shook the pan once. The fried rice in the pan didn't budge. With a serious look on her face, she tried again, putting more strength into it. The fried rice leaped out of the pan, scattering around. "Oh no, it spilled out," she said. "Let me do this," I offered. I gently pushed her to the back of the room and resumed cooking. Then, we sat across from each other at a small table and ate the fried rice. Thanks to the storm, the room was noisy with all the creaking and groaning. "Have you lived here for a long time?" she asked. "Well, I'm about to renew my lease for the third time, so about 6 years, almost 7, actually. Why do you ask?" I responded, looking up at her. She seemed lost in thought. Then, she pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. It was a horoscope app. It says, "A time of many troubles. Reconsidering your current environment might be beneficial." "Do you believe this kind of stuff?" I asked. "Well, not necessarily, but it's kind of on my mind. Some things do come true," she replied. Now, I understood what she was trying to say. She had previously mentioned that her recent streak of bad luck might be due to her current apartment. And now, this horoscope suggests she should reconsider her environment. The first thing that came to her mind when she thought about changing her environment was her apartment. She may be wondering if she should move or not. And so, out of curiosity, she asked me how long I've been living here. The other day, it was an exorcism, now a horoscope. I realized she was surprisingly superstitious. "So, are you thinking of moving?" I asked. "How did you know? Are you a clairvoyant?" she responded. "What is clairvoyance?" So she's not only superstitious. Well, why not? A fresh start can be a good thing. Maybe you should consider moving, I suggested. "I guess so. Maybe I really should move after all." She seemed to be still struggling. But I thought, if she decided to move and disappeared from the apartment across the street, I would feel lonely in a different way. She said she was about to go home, so she was putting on her shoes in the entryway. The peak of the hurricane seemed to have passed, but even so, it was still pouring rain outside. "Thanks for the fried rice." "Hold on, I'll walk you home." With that, I grabbed my coat and quickly put on my shoes. Even though I said I'd walk her home, her apartment was right across the street. The width of the street is only about 13 feet. It only takes a few steps to get to the other side. But I wanted to walk her home. We descended to the first floor of the apartment. I opened the coat I was carrying, and we both held it above our heads like a makeshift umbrella. "Let's go." Then, 1 step, 2 steps. The rainwater pooled on the road splashed up. 3 more steps and we could cross the road. I shouted, holding her shoulder. "All right, let's go for it." "Yes. On your marks, get set, go." Hop, step, jump. We landed in front of her apartment. Then, she pulled my hand and dragged me into the entrance. "I've decided. I'm going to move." So you've decided. I regretted a bit for telling her to move unnecessarily. Can I have your contact? When she asked, I gave her my cell phone number. She saved that into her smartphone. I'll send you an email later. I silently nodded and said goodbye to her. A month later, she left the apartment across the street. I thought I would feel lonely not seeing her face anymore, but that was not the case. Instead, I became busier. Because I'm exchanging emails with her many times a day. How did you like today's story? Your channel subscription and likes give me the motivation to keep creating. I'm also looking forward to reading your comments. See you in the next video. My name's Sam Baker. I'm a single 33-year-old man, working for a medical equipment manufacturer. I've just moved back to the head office from our regional branch after 10 years. My boss, Director Johnson, was very happy to welcome me back. Sam, congratulations on returning to the head office. Today's on me. Drink as much as you want, he said, patting me on the shoulder with a beer mug in his hand. He invited me out for a drink, partly to celebrate my return to the head office. Thank you, but the fact I didn't let myself get down and worked hard in the regional office is also thanks to you, Director. This wasn't mere flattery, but a simple fact. About a year after I started working at this company, the then director ordered me to suddenly start working at the regional branch. Back then, Mr. Johnson was just a manager. It seemed the director at that time didn't like me because I was too quiet and boring. That's why I ended up being sent to the regional office, which was just short on staff. I was afraid I might never be able to return to the head office. Mr. Johnson, seeing my anxiety, reassured me with kind words. Believe it or not, I was also sent to the regional office from the head office in the past. I was depressed at first, thinking I had been driven out because I was unnecessary here. But you know what? It was the results I produced there that got me to where I am today. I want you to believe that this personnel change isn't a demotion. It's a personnel change to rebuild the regional branch. I need your help, Sam. So don't get discouraged. Just do your best at the regional branch for now. His words were more encouraging than I could ever explain. I was disheartened when the personnel change was announced, but thanks to Johnson, I was able to face forward and push on. Even after I moved to the regional branch, I sought advice from Director Johnson and pushed myself harder. As a result, the branch's performance greatly improved, and now, I'm finally back at the head office. Since the previous director has also been transferred to another department, I'll start afresh and work hard at the head office. While we were happily chatting about our reunion, Johnson suddenly said something unexpected. Sam, would you consider having a dinner date with my daughter, if you're okay with it? Wait, your daughter? The moment I heard the word dinner date, I froze. Truth is, I've never had a girlfriend in my life. I appreciate the offer, but as you know, Director, I'm not exactly a social butterfly. I've never even had a relationship with a woman. I'm afraid your daughter might find me unsuitable. But Mr. Johnson gently reassured me. That's not true at all. Compared to 10 years ago, Sam, you're a completely different person. You've grown through your struggles in the regional branch, and you communicate smoothly now. I highly value that part of you. That's what I thought of introducing you to my daughter, and I believe you two would be compatible in terms of personality. It's just a casual dinner to meet each other, so don't worry. I had no idea that Mr. Johnson thought so highly of me. I was moved by his words and ended up accepting his invitation for a dinner date. Mr. Johnson showed me a photo of his daughter on his phone, and she was stunningly beautiful, but after the drinks were over and I was on my way home, I was already regretting my decision. I can't possibly handle a relationship. I never shared this with my boss, but I actually have a traumatic experience related to romance. Let's go back in time, 16 years ago. When I was 17, my mom ran off with her lover to some faraway place. The shock of my mom's disappearance hit me hard, but the bad news didn't stop there. My dad, angry and feeling betrayed by my mom, started taking it out on me. Your mother left us because she couldn't stand you. You'll live a lonely life, unloved by anyone. he ranted, drowning his sorrows in booze. I think seeing my face, which resembled my mother's, must have pissed him off. I didn't have any notable skills or talents. Perhaps I lacked the charm as a child to keep my mom from leaving my dad. His harsh words hurt me deeply, and my introverted personality grew stronger. From then on, my dad's drinking got worse. He left all the house chores to me, and he'd quickly resort to violence when something displeased him. I had to do all the housework perfectly to avoid my father's anger, and before I knew it, I started being late to school more frequently. Constant tardiness, a destructive home environment, and the negative aura surrounding me led me to isolate myself from everyone around me. I started to feel uncomfortable in my own class and began to seek refuge in the school nurse's office. The school nurse, Ms. Miller, was very kind and would always listen attentively to my stories. Although I couldn't share everything considering my father's situation, the mere presence of Ms. Miller, who would lend me her time and ears, was a relief to me. You can tell me anything that's bothering you. Regarding your studies, it's for your own good that you should strive to pass your courses. Once you can stand on your own, you'll be able to get away from your father sooner. And she was absolutely right. If I kept this up, I wouldn't be able to graduate. So, I committed myself to attend all my classes, and I spent the rest of my time seeking refuge in the nurse's office. I started to get a handle on my house chores and stopped being late, narrowly avoiding repeating a year. Amidst this lifestyle, another reason emerged for me to frequent the nurse's office. There was another student, a girl, who also spent time there, and I quietly looked forward to my interactions with her. Her name was Emily Brown, and she was a grade below me. "Good morning, Sam." She'd greet me with a smile every morning I visited the nurse's office. I was happy to see her, so I always smiled back and replied, "Good morning." Emily often said, "I'm basically homeschooled in the nurse's office." She rarely went to her actual class, spending most of her day in the nurse's office instead. This was due to Emily's appearance. She always wore a wrinkled uniform, hid her face behind long bangs, and had a simple style with her long hair tied back. Because of this, Emily was often called unkempt and was generally avoided by everyone else. However, it wasn't that Emily was lazy. The root of the issue lay in her home environment. Her parents favored her older sister and were always harsh towards Emily. Because of this, she seldom got new clothes or everyday essentials, and she couldn't afford to go to a hair salon, hence her appearance. Despite all of this, I thought Emily was a wonderful girl. I borrowed a really interesting book from the library yesterday. "It's such a blessing to have these wonderful books available to us," she'd say with a smile. Seeing Emily speak like this gave me a boost of energy. Despite being placed in a seemingly insurmountable situation, she always maintained a positive attitude, constantly looking for things to enjoy. While everyone else was focusing on Emily's appearance, I noticed her beautiful eyes peeking from behind her long bangs. Clear and beautiful light brown eyes. My heart pounded every time I saw that sparkle, and our conversations became my solace as I barely survived my harsh school life. Looking back now, I guess that was my first love. But despite my feelings, one day, suddenly, Emily disappeared. She had transferred schools without saying a word. When I asked the teachers about her disappearance, due to privacy reasons, they couldn't tell me anything. I thought of her as a companion, someone who used to visit the school nurse with me. I never expected such a sudden farewell. Just like when my mother suddenly disappeared, everyone seems to leave me behind. After that, I somehow managed to graduate high school, and with the help of scholarships, I moved on to a distant university. That's how I finally got away from my father. But no matter how much time passed, since Emily's departure, I had never fallen in love with anyone else. I couldn't forget about Emily, and the fear of getting hurt kept me from entering into any romantic relationship. Therefore, I felt sorry for my boss, but I wasn't sure the dinner date he set up for me would go well. On the day of the dinner date, at the private room of the restaurant where we agreed to meet, a woman more beautiful than the one I saw on my boss's cell phone appeared, and I was taken aback. "Nice to meet you, I'm Emily." The boss's daughter introduced herself, bowing politely. "Nice to meet you. I hope we have a good day today." Emily, with her beautiful fair skin, was elegantly dressed in a monochrome dress. As her smooth chestnut hair swayed, radiating a lovely aura, my heart raced. I felt an uncanny connection knowing her name was Emily. Apparently, I seemed to have a strong connection to that name. The dinner date was nerve-wracking, but since we both loved reading, the conversation flowed better than I expected. "Sam, you like reading too. I often visit the library on my days off." "Really? Any recent book recommendations?" When I asked, Emily gave a clear explanation about her recommended books. Seeing her talk so passionately, and with a smile, I was taken in by her charm. Who knew I could enjoy such a pleasant time with a woman? However, at some point, Emily suddenly fell silent, with a cryptic look on her face. Did I say something wrong? Feeling uneasy, I asked, "Is something wrong?" She fixed her gaze on me and said, "Good heavens, it's time you noticed." Saying this, she lifted the sleeve of her dress, revealing a bracelet made of black gemstones. The moment I saw that bracelet, I let out a small "ah," as a memory from 16 years ago came flooding back. That day, I headed to the school's nurse's office as usual during lunch break. The nurse, Ms. Miller, must have gone to the restroom because her seat was empty, and there was no one in the office. However, at that moment, a gust of wind blew in from the window, causing the curtains on the infirmary bed to flutter, and I witnessed an astonishing sight. What? Through the gap in the curtains, I saw Emily on the bed, holding a large number of Blackpool-like objects in her hand. She was staring intently at the pills on the table attached to the bed. Was she planning to swallow those? No matter what medication it was, consuming it all at once would surely harm her health. Emily, unable to stay still, I barged through the curtain and rushed to the bed. "Sam, what's going on?" Surprised at my sudden appearance, I grabbed Emily's shoulders and blurted out, "Don't jump the gun. We're still young. No matter how hard things are now, if we keep living, good things will happen. I don't want you to disappear, Emily." As I said this, I realized that I was crying. I didn't want to lose Emily. My emotions were so strong that I naturally burst into tears. However, in contrast to my panic, Emily was calm. "What on earth are you talking about? I'm just making a bracelet with stones I got from the library's teacher." What? It turned out that the items Emily had were not pearls, but gemstones. Knowing my misunderstanding, Emily laughed out loud. Feeling embarrassed about my overreaction, I blushed. Then, Emily handed me a bracelet with a cheerful smile. "This Morian stone is said to protect from unpleasant things. I already have one, so I'll give one to you, Sam." "Really? Oh, thank you." I never expected to receive a gift from Emily, and I was genuinely happy. "Yes, because you're my important nurse's room buddy, Sam. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." Despite saying that, Emily disappeared without a trace. And now, that same Emily is right before my eyes. Unconsciously, my eyes filling with tears, I pulled out a black Morian bracelet from my suit pocket. It's been 16 years since then. I have been wearing it without fail. Before I knew it, my eyes too were moistened, just like her beautiful hazel eyes. I'm sorry for transferring schools so abruptly, but there was a profound reason behind it. According to her, her parents had been violent towards her, and feeling threatened because of their escalated behavior, she had run away from home. Emily's mother's brother was, in fact, Mr. Johnson, who was the director. The two of them were uncle and niece. And Emily had gone to ask for help from her uncle, who lived in the neighboring state. The director, who had always been worried about Emily, thought that he could no longer leave her with her parents, severed ties with his sister, and adopted Emily. And so Emily's last name changed from Brown to Johnson. Hearing about Emily's tragic past, my heart ached. It's understandable why she had to transfer schools abruptly. Emily, wiping her tears, began to speak. "I haven't been able to forget about you since then. So when my father brought me a marriage proposal, I was really surprised. I recognized your unique last name immediately. It was unmistakably you, Sam. I'm honestly so happy. I was a mess in high school, wasn't I? I knew it and I was so embarrassed. That's why I couldn't express my feelings back then. I knew that even someone as kind as you, Sam, couldn't possibly like someone like me. Listening to Emily's words, I was astonished. I couldn't believe she had felt the same way about me. I, too, was in love with Emily, but I always thought that no woman would ever like me. But now, I think I've improved my appearance a bit. So please let me say this, I like you, Sam. Emily, don't belittle yourself like that. I've always loved you. Then and now, to me, you are always beautiful. I had to let her know that, even before she finished her sentence. It wasn't just about loving her now. For me, Emily had always been someone special. Hearing my words, Emily blushed and cried. I could tell that those were not tears of sadness. Thank you. Despite the hardships I had in high school, I managed to get through those days because of you, Sam. We held each other's hands on the table, waiting for our tears to stop. Everyone seemed to leave me, but Emily kept her promise. She came back to me. I felt deeply that this truth washed away my hurtful past, with tears. After a year of dating, we decided to get married. Upon learning that we knew each other from the beginning, Mr. Johnson, the director, was very surprised. I was shocked. I had no idea that you two knew each other, but I am really grateful to you, Sam. Emily was wounded in high school, but thanks to you, she was able to recover. As he spoke, he gazed into the distance, as if reminiscing about the past. My wife and I had some issues, and we couldn't have children. That's also why I've always thought of Emily as my own daughter. Not being able to have children must have been hard for Mr. Johnson at that time. But it was clear to me that he and his wife truly cared for Emily, even though she wasn't their own. Emily said she was truly happy to become your adopted daughter. I believe that the reason she can smile like this now is because of you. When you say that, it makes me happy. I always wanted her to be happy after all the suffering she's been through. But I believe that you will certainly make my daughter happy, Sam. With that, Mr. Johnson blushed and laughed shyly. That's right. By marrying her, I would also become Mr. Johnson's son. With a big smile on my face, I nodded vigorously. Of course, I will start calling you my father-in-law. Ha ha, I can't believe I'm getting a son as well as a daughter. It feels like a dream. It's possible that each of our past experiences might have been dark and sad. Still, it was through irreplaceable encounters that we were able to know the joy of loving and being loved. While savoring such happiness, I looked forward to a future filled with hope. I was born and raised in New York, but 2 years ago, I moved out of my parents' house and started living alone in the city. If I stayed at home, I don't have to pay rent, and my mom would cook all my meals. Sure, it was easy, but I wanted to stand on my own independence. There is an apartment I chose in a spot where I could get to work on a single train line. No transfers necessary. It's a modest 4-story building with a total of 12 units. The first and second floors cater to singles. The third and fourth floors are geared towards families, and my apartment was a corner one on the second floor. That evening, right after I came back from work, my doorbell rang. Given that the building entrance is secured with an automatic lock, so I thought it must be one of my fellow residents. I'm not exactly chummy with any of them, so I wondered what they might want. When I opened the door, it was a young woman who said she'd just moved into the apartment next door. Oh, she's pretty cute. Opening the door sparked something in me. She was probably around my age. Not too skinny, not too fat, with bright, wide eyes and a quiet demeanor, she struck me as a typical, diligent office worker. Hi, I'm Mary, just moved into 202 next door. Hi, I'm James. She introduced herself, offering me a small paper bag with handles. It was a gift for her new neighbors. Some might wonder, do people in New York still do this, making courtesy visits when they move in? Of course, not everyone does. But some do, indeed. Whether or not they do it, it's up to the individual. There may be differences in first impressions, but I don't judge people based on whether they greet or not. That's the depth of tolerance you find in New York. After we exchanged a simple greeting and she left, I quickly opened the housewarming gift she had brought. Inside was a cookie shaped like a cat. A cat, but it's a cookie. I don't dislike cookies, but I don't particularly enjoy eating them either. I dislike the feeling of crumbs getting stuck in the crevices and contours of my teeth after eating. Still, I appreciated the gift and decided to save it for when I was peckish. Anyway, this new neighbor of mine and I seemed to share quite a few life patterns. Our timings coincided when taking out the trash in the morning and heading to work. Although there were several ways to get to the station, our usual paths overlapped. Our times for returning home in the evening coincided too. We even bumped into each other at the local shopping street on days off. So, we ended up having casual conversations along the way. "Mary, are you by any chance a cat lover?" Why would you say that?" I found her overreaction strange and responded, "Well, the cookies you gave me when you moved in, they were shaped like cats." "Darn it, oh right. Why did I choose those again?" She looked embarrassed and gave a wry smile. On my days off from work, I would either lounge around at home, or at most, head out to the local shopping street or the neighborhood grocery store. One day, while I was waiting at a frequently crossed intersection, a large dog on a walk half stood and clung to my waist. The owner pulled the dog back and apologized to me. But I love dogs, so I was rather pleased. I bent over and gave the dog a hearty pat on its neck. Since then, I looked forward to meeting the dog on its walk at that intersection. The dog would half stand and cling to me as if it was a given when we met. I prepared dog treats, of course, with the owner's permission, and gave them to the dog. The dog would eat the treats I held in my hand. When the dog took the treats, its fluffy fur would tickle my palm. Those few minutes were moments of pure bliss for me. However, one day, Mary happened to pass by while I was frolicking with the dog at the intersection. She must have been very surprised because she was staring at me, halfway recoiling. Even when I greeted her, she remained stiff. I later learned that she wasn't particularly fond or afraid of animals, but she was scared and had a hard time with large dogs. It had been about a month since Mary moved in. That morning, as we were walking together to the station, she said, "People have been clearing their throats at me, clicking their tongues." She was talking about incidents on the escalator. She was originally from Kansas, and it was her first time living outside the Midwest. In the Midwest, when riding escalators, people stand on the right side and leave the left side open. However, in the Northeast, it's the opposite. She had heard about it, but out of habit, she stood on the right side of the escalator, which would earn her some throat clearing and tongue clicking from people behind her. Is the food taste different too? Yes, but New York has everything. Still, she was surprised by the thinness of the 8-slice bread. In the Midwest, even 6-slice bread is considered thin. Speaking of bread, there's the egg sandwich. In the Northeast, the standard is a sandwich with egg salad made from chopped boiled eggs mixed with mayonnaise, but in the Midwest, it's common to sandwich something like an omelet. There are other differences too, like local slangs, abbreviations for famous burger chains, and whether beer sizes are referred to as pint or half pint. Even though she knew these differences intellectually, experiencing them firsthand led to a series of surprises. She shared somewhat bashfully. I enjoyed listening to her stories. I had never left New York except for vacations. So, I assumed that the norms in New York were the norms of America. But I imagined if I were to be transferred to the Midwest or some other region, I would be as bewildered and surprised as she is now. In retrospect, New York is an exceptional place within the country. Of the people living in New York, just over half are native New Yorkers like me. The rest are people who have moved in from other regions. People often say New Yorkers are cold, but if you're referring to people living in New York, nearly half of them are folks who have migrated from other regions. That morning, as usual, I was taking out the trash and about to head to the subway station. She, who normally appears right after me, was surprisingly late. Wondering if she had a different schedule that day, I waited for her a bit. Just then, she came running up, looking rushed. "Good morning. Did you oversleep? Did you wait for me?" she asked, looking apologetic as she disposed of her trash. "I didn't oversleep, but, Luna, I took a little time getting ready." As she said this, she brushed off her navy blue suit skirt. We then, as usual, walked side by side toward the station. I glanced at her shoulder. Numerous thin, short, white hair-like things were there. Because of the navy color, the dust was noticeable. "There's something on your shoulder," I said to her casually. She hastily brushed it off with her hand. "Yeah, I was worried about dust on my clothes. That's why I was late getting out." The following weekend, after having lunch at a burger chain with the different acronym she mentioned, I was walking home through the shopping district. There she was, intently reading a flyer or something posted on a light pole. I called out to her from a short distance away. But for some reason, she ignored me and ran off. Puzzled, I watched her leave, then walked up to the pole and looked at the poster she had been engrossed in. It was a flyer for a cat adoption event. I recall her saying she was indifferent to animals. After returning to my apartment, I checked my mailbox and found, mixed in with the junk mail, a notice from the apartment management company. It stated they had received complaints about pet food pouches in the residents' trash, and they were reminding everyone that pets were prohibited in this building. This can't be about me, can it? I remembered that I had given some treats to a large dog I'd met at the crossroads and had brought the empty bag home to throw away. I guessed that someone who saw it might have contacted the management company. The bag was translucent, and I had carelessly thrown it in, so it must have been visible. I bowed my head in apology to the unknown fellow resident for the misunderstanding. However, it wasn't me who had caused a misunderstanding, nor was it someone else. Indeed, someone was keeping a pet in one of the apartments in this building. It was right after this when it came to light. As I returned to my room, I opened the window and leaned out to check the garbage bag I'd left on the balcony. As I lifted the bag, sure enough, through the bag and mixed with the other garbage, the recognizable pouch from the dog treats was plainly visible. At that moment, something caught the corner of my eye. There was a partition board between my balcony and the next rooms. At the bottom of the board, there was a gap about 4 inches high from the floor. There was something gray on the floor in front of that gap. For a moment, I thought it was a dead mouse and I jumped. Then, with trepidation, I took a closer look. Turned out, it was a mouse all right, but a small mouse stuffed animal. Did it fall from the balcony above? As I reached down to pick up the stuffed mouse, I noticed something moving in and out of the gap in the partition. What is this? It was a soft, stick-like object covered in pale fur. When I tried to get a closer look by bringing my face near, it quickly retracted, and when I gave up and pulled my face away, it came out again. It wasn't just moving in and out, either. The tip of it was beckoning, as if trying to retrieve something. I initially thought it was one stick, but it was actually 2. Then I noticed the paw pads. It was a cat's paw. It probably had been playing with the mouse stuffed animal on the neighboring balcony and had accidentally pushed it onto mine. It was trying to retrieve it. I pushed the mouse stuffed animal back toward the gap at the bottom of the partition. Immediately, the cat's paw pounced and retracted, clutching the stuffed animal. "Good for you, kitty. You got your toy back." For a while, I was grinning to myself, picturing the cat probably playing ecstatically with the reclaimed stuffed mouse. Then, I suddenly snapped back to reality. Next door was her apartment. Why would there be a cat in her place? All right, the dust on her navy blue suit when she came over, it was cat hair. She must have a cat, there's no doubt about it. Even though this apartment complex doesn't allow pets. This was not something I could ignore. I immediately went to visit her next door. When I rang the doorbell, she cracked open the door and peeked out. As she asked what the matter was, I shoved a notice from the management company in front of her nose. "Did you see this? It was in your mailbox, wasn't it?" Yes, I saw it, but..." She was clearly flustered. "Is this your cat, perhaps, Mary?" No, not at all." She was grimacing. "Then why was there a cat on your balcony? I saw it, just now." Could it have been a mistake? Maybe. Her face was pale. I peered over her shoulder into the room. But there was no sign of a cat. Then it happened. She let out a little gasp and lifted one foot. I looked down at her feet. "So, who's this?" A cat sat at her feet, its head resting on its front paws. The cat looked up at me as if to plead not to torment her. Then, she picked up the cat and invited me into the room. When I walked further into the room, she put the cat down on the floor and headed to the kitchen to make tea. "Yes, she's mine. Her name is Luna." Whiskers stayed where she was put down, sprawling on the floor. Once she made tea for me and herself, she sat down at the table, gave some fresh water to Luna next to her, and turned to me. As I took a sip of tea, Luna staggered to her feet and began to drink water too. She looked down at Luna and said, "I found her when she was a kitten. I was in kindergarten at the time, so she's already 18 years old or maybe even older, a real old lady." She said they were like sisters, growing up together because she was an only child. She has lived a long life, but I wonder how many more years, or months, or weeks. No, how many more days we can be together. She was born and raised in Kansas, her hometown, graduated from a local community college, and got a job at a local company through her father's connections. But she couldn't give up her longing for New York, so she applied to a job posting by a company in New York and was luckily hired mid-career. She decided to move to New York, but had to find a place to live on her own. She sought advice from friends and searched online for housing. Finding a place was difficult, she admitted, especially without any familiarity with New York. In her apartment search, she couldn't find a place that met her requirements like location, budget, and pet friendliness. Her start date was fixed and she didn't have much time. She chose this apartment, mainly because it seemed convenient for commuting. She considered leaving her cat behind since pets were prohibited in the apartment. But you ended up bringing her anyway, not knowing how many more days you could spend together. She bowed her head at my words. As I watched her, I remembered my own childhood. My family home was in an old residential neighborhood in the heart of New York, lined with aging single-family homes. Even as a child, I could peer over the fences of our neighbors' homes. Back then, an elderly couple lived next door. They were always very kind to me. They had a dog that they kept in their yard. The dog was friendly towards me. We often played over the fence, and sometimes I even took it for walks. It was in the fall when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. The old couple next door decided to move in with their son due to their old age. I was just a kid, but I felt sad thinking about saying goodbye to the dog. And so, it was the eve of the old couple's move. Due to a typhoon, heavy rain was falling outside. The wind was so strong that the glass on the porch was shaking and making noise. I went to the porch to check the outside. Then I noticed a different noise, not from the wind, but something hitting the glass. I looked down. There, soaked to the skin, was the neighbor's dog, batting at the glass door with its paws. I quickly opened the glass door. The dog leapt out at me. It then licked my face all over. Rain mercilessly invaded the porch. My mother noticed and told me to close the glass door. Ignoring my mother's words, I took off my t-shirt and used it as a towel, wiping the wet body of the dog. No matter how much I wiped, the rain kept pouring on. Looking back now, I still wonder, how did the dog, who should have been tied to its doghouse, got free and came to me? All I know for sure is that night, that dog came to say goodbye to me. And it hurted to say goodbye to that dog. She stayed still, with her head bowed. I couldn't bring myself to blame her, and I was at a loss for what to do. Then, Luna seemed to climb onto my lap where I was sitting in the chair, twisting her upper body onto her back and rubbing her head against me. I restrained her when she hastily tried to pick up Luna. "Maybe she's telling you not to beat yourself up anymore," I said. Upon hearing this, she covered her face with both hands and broke down crying on the spot. She said she never had any intention of hiding the fact that she had a cat and staying in this apartment for a long time. However, there were plenty of things she was still trying to get used to in her workplace and in her new life in a city like New York. She said she would look for another property where she could live with her cat whenever she had the time, but with no familiarity with the area and no knowledge of average rents, she couldn't find one. If I were the landlord of this place, I thought, I might have said, "If that's the situation, I'll give you a bit of a reprieve," but I didn't think it would go that well. These days, the world tends to adhere strictly to rules, or rather, there's no room for leniency. So, I told her that it would be bad to keep Luna in a pet-prohibited apartment, but we should keep it a secret for a while. And I decided to help her look for a new apartment. However, the situation drastically changed within 3 days. It was right after I came home. The doorbell was rung persistently, as if waiting for my return. When I went to see, she was standing there, large tears streaming down her face. When I dropped my gaze slightly from her face, Luna, no longer moving, was in her arms. When I came back home, she usually comes to greet me at the entrance. I thought it was strange, and then I found her on the sofa. As she said this, she crumbled to the floor, crying loudly, still holding Luna in her arms. "I'm sorry, Luna, I was foolish." I searched for words to say to her, but couldn't find any. So, instead of words, I hugged her, gently rubbing her back as I did so. Several weeks after that, we started looking for a place to live together. "This place is pet-friendly," I said, having found a pet-friendly property by chance and mentioning it out of interest. "But I don't." She pulled out her smartphone with a somewhat distant look in her eyes. On the lock screen of her smartphone was Luna, who looked like she was smiling gently. Looking at Luna on her phone, she turned to me and gave a wistful smile. "That's right. What about this one? Doesn't it look like a decent place?" "Indeed, it does. How did you like today's story?" Your subscriptions and likes really help motivate us in our production work. We look forward to reading your comments. Until the next video, take care. In April, it seems people have the itch to try something new. Just like every year, as the end of April approaches, there's been an increase in climbers with brand new gear. At the lodge, while serving meals, I'm constantly on the lookout for anyone who might be overconfident in their shiny new equipment. Preventing accidents before they happen is also part of the job for those of us making a living off the mountain. My name's Jake Sullivan. I just turned 29 this year. If you ask me about my profession, I'd stumble a bit on the answer. Currently, I'm working as a mountain guide and part-time at the lodge. I stay in the US working these part-time jobs, and once I've saved up enough, I set out to conquer mountains overseas. Mountaineering is expensive, and things like permits can be a hassle, so I can't always jump right into it. It's especially tough for a broke climber like me. But a job with a goal in mind doesn't feel like a burden. This season, being able to live and entrust myself to the wilderness is my ideal environment. Today is the last Saturday of April, and many people are heading into a long weekend. The lodge is bustling. There are plenty of regulars. But there was one woman who clearly stood out. She seemed to have depleted quite a bit of energy to get here. Her pale complexion didn't strike me as that of a frequent mountain goer. She was panting and carefully settled herself down at a corner in front of the lodge, so as not to get in the way of others. She was constantly checking the heel of her left foot. She probably has a blister from her new hiking boots. I went inside the lodge for a moment, picked up a Band-Aid specially designed for blisters, and approached the woman. The sun hid behind my back, casting a shadow around her as she sat down. When I saw her lift her head in surprise, I was momentarily captivated. I mean, she was more beautiful than any other woman I had ever met. I'm not sure how to explain it, but she had a sort of translucent, fragile beauty. Her long jet black hair was tied up with a hair tie, but it shone brilliantly. "Excuse me, aren't you getting a blister? Here, take this." As I offered her a plaster, she looked at me suspiciously. She seemed to be on guard, being approached by a big guy on top of a mountain. I explained that I was a mountain guide, and also worked part-time at a mountain hut. With this, her tension eased a bit. "Thank you." In a small voice, she accepted the plaster. All the while, I couldn't help but look at her gear. It all seemed brand new, like this was her first time hiking. "How far are you planning to go?" I casually asked her as she took off her hiking boots and lowered her socks to check her heel. It was already past noon. If she aimed for the summit from here, she would end up walking back in the dark, which could be dangerous. Ideally, I wanted her to turn back here or aim for the summit tomorrow morning. Despite my hopes, she told me that she intended to reach the summit. Fog was starting to hang around the summit. Mountain weather can change quickly. Even if you aim for the summit now, it will be dark by the time you descend. There's fog coming in as well. Wouldn't it be better to give up for today and aim for the summit tomorrow morning after spending the night at the hut? On hearing my words, she frowned in discomfort. She seemed to dislike being instructed by others. But this was a matter of life, and I wasn't ready to back down just yet. If she got lost and the colleagues who went to rescue her got into trouble, I couldn't bear the thought. "I appreciate your concern, but I have my own plans. I find it uncomfortable to be directed by a stranger like you." Contrary to her delicate and seemingly quiet appearance, she clearly voiced her opinion. I was a little surprised by this unexpected gap. Casting a glance at me, she quickly started to pack her things. She seemed to want to leave here as soon as possible. "Hold on a minute, are you really going?" She ignored my hurried words. It looked like it was going to be difficult to stop her. I quickly called out to the boss of the mountain hut, explaining that a potentially dangerous guest was going up and I was going to accompany her. He quickly gave the go-ahead, so I grabbed my always-ready backpack and followed her. Soon, I could see her brand new backpack. Thinking she might dislike it if I got too close, I kept my distance while watching her clumsy hike. Just as I expected, her pace was slow. All the other hikers we passed were hurrying down the mountain. The fog near the peak thickened, and the scent of rain grew stronger. Unaware of the changing weather, she was persistently moving her feet. Even a dull guy like me could tell that she had some reason for climbing this mountain. I wish I could grant her desire. But this weather isn't good. I caught up with her at a run and called out, "We'll have rain soon. Let's turn back." Caught on the shoulder by me, she turns back in surprise. Her face had turned completely pale. She must have been pushing herself too hard to get this far. It might even be difficult to turn back all at once from here. "You're persistent. Leave me alone." She tried to shake off my hand on her shoulder, but it seems like she didn't have the strength left for even that. The next moment, a streak of lightning flashes, followed by a thunderclap. Big droplets of rain started to fall immediately. "Do you have a raincoat?" She shakes her head in response to my question. I was a little annoyed at whatever sports store she had gotten her gear from. Not at her. I was annoyed at the salesperson who hadn't given her any rain gear. But this was no time to be annoyed. The rain was getting worse by the second. I hurriedly set up a small tent in a place off the path that looked safe. "For now, get in." Just after I forced the somewhat resistant her into the tent, the rain turned into a downpour. I'm glad we made it in just in time. I was deeply relieved that we got in before we were soaked to the bone. The small tent was barely enough for 2 people. To prevent it from being blown away, I'd go outside once and secure it properly. When I come back into the tent, she silently offers me a towel. "Thanks." I gratefully wipe my wet body with the towel. It smelled faintly of fabric softener. It was pouring. The raindrops seemed like they might pierce through the tent. I used a solid fuel to boil water and made cocoa. It was a storm outside, but the sweet aroma of the cocoa made me forget about it. The inside of the small tent felt like a different world. "Here you go." As I offered her the prepared cocoa, she slightly nodded and accepted it. The cocoa warmed her from inside. Perhaps it was just my imagination, but her complexion seemed a bit better. "Tomorrow morning, let's aim for the summit." There was no response from her to my words. The next morning, the rain ceased as if it had never been. We decided to head for the summit at dawn with the sunrise. She insisted that she could go alone, but I persuaded her and watched from a close but not too close distance. Maybe she was getting used to the mountain a bit. Her footsteps seemed lighter than yesterday. As her determination to reach the summit is such high, she'll surely smile once she reaches the top. I followed her, thinking such thoughts. Now here comes the unbelievable part. When we finally reached the summit, there was no smile on her face. She was just staring intently at the other mountains visible from the peak. I couldn't possibly think she had come mountain climbing because she liked mountains. She didn't even take pictures or express joy. She left the summit within less than 5 minutes. And just like that, she started descending as if fleeing. She didn't look back at me, and of course, didn't utter a single word of gratitude. I didn't help her because I wanted gratitude, but it still saddened me. In the end, I never even got to know her name. I've met an unbelievably rude woman. As soon as I got back to the cabin, I told my part-time colleagues about last night. I rarely get angry, but my colleagues found it funny and laughed at me holding their stomachs. I truly thought she was a rude woman. That was my first encounter with her. Mountains are inherently dangerous, and even the skilled people can abruptly lose their lives. A senior who guides mountain climbing with me, called Bob, once lost a climbing partner on a mountain abroad. Both of them had a long history of climbing and were skilled. "It's sudden," Bob chuckled bitterly. Today was the 3rd anniversary of his climbing partner's death. He asked me to accompany him to pay respects, so I went with him to buy incense and flowers for the deceased's grave. The destination was a well-kept cemetery. In one corner of the cemetery, I saw a figure praying ardently in front of the tombstone. As we approached, the figure quickly stood up. "What? It's the rude woman I met on the mountain the other day." In my astonishment, the truth slipped out of my mouth. Suddenly, Bob reached out and covered my mouth. "Bob, you remembered my husband's 3rd-year anniversary, didn't you?" she quietly said. I could feel a tense energy radiating from Bob, who stood next to me. Bob is usually a bright individual and always positive. He never feels out of place and is kind to everyone. Seeing such a person so tensed up, I was taken aback. "There's no way I could forget, Laura," Bob managed to squeeze out. "It seems like she is Laura, the wife of his late climbing partner." That he would address her by her first name. They must have been close in the past. But now, there's a cold wind blowing between the two. Laura stared at Bob with icy eyes. "Did you climb the mountain? Did you get to like it a bit?" Bob asked after a moment of silence. Probably he couldn't withstand Laura's cold gaze and silence any longer. "No, not at all. I despise it even more. I just can't understand people who climb mountains," Laura said, her lips twisted in disdain. It seemed as if she was choosing her words to hurt Bob. "Laura, do you hate me?" "What, you're asking the obvious. Of course, I hate both the mountain and you." Leaving these harsh words behind, Laura walked away. After she left, Bob just crumbled and sat down on the spot. That night, I went out for drinks with Bob. I was worried about letting him go home alone. He rarely got drunk, but that night, he was terribly inebriated. Again and again, he mumbled words of apology to Laura in a groaning voice. I have never seen Bob like this before. It almost made me hate Laura, who was pushing him to this point. By the time I managed to get him into his apartment, the sky was already beginning to lighten. The next day, Bob was back to his usual self. Looking a little shy, he apologized for his behavior the night before, saying, "Sorry about that." All I could muster was, "It's okay." Once I returned to the mountains, I diligently continued my work. By the time the tourist season was ending, I could see the prospects of securing funds for my next climbing expedition. I was considering trying to climb Denali in Alaska. That's what I had been thinking about all this time. Of course, I didn't have such a conceited idea that I could conquer it in one go. I am merely a challenger. I intend to challenge it as many times as it takes. Upon hearing this, my longtime friend, Steve, offered to support me. He is looking for companies that could provide financial support. The reason I had come down from the mountains to return to the city after such a long time was because I received a message from him saying that he had found a company likely to provide funding. It happened to be a time when preparations that couldn't be done in the mountains, like gathering equipment and submitting applications, had been piling up. I borrowed a suit, something I was not accustomed to wearing, from Steve and got myself reasonably dressed. I told him that I should be fine in my usual outfit, but Steve told me, "It's a big corporation." The place he took me to was the headquarters of a large company that even I, being disconnected from the world, knew about. The massive building was overwhelming. From the entrance, you could see business people in suits going in and out, looking very busy. I couldn't believe that Steve had managed to rope in such a big company. I followed him into the building's entrance. The lobby at the end of the bright, open atrium seemed to reflect a positive and open corporate culture. While Steve was confirming our appointment at the reception counter, I absent-mindedly stared into the lobby. Right in the center of the lobby, they were in the process of refreshing the flowers in a large vase. Is that? There she was, Laura. She was arranging flowers in front of the large vase with certainty. Her profile looked very serious. I looked around to see if there was any other staff, but there was no one. Noticing my gaze, Laura stopped arranging the flowers and looked over. I involuntarily shuddered. Narrowing her eyes slightly, she confirmed it was me, and without hesitation, started walking towards me. I panicked at her approach. I thought she might throw harsh words at me again. I had an important presentation coming up. It would be disastrous if my spirit broke at a time like this. But there was nowhere for me to escape. I closed my eyes tightly and repeated a soothing mantra. I even prayed that she had mistaken me for someone else. I didn't get your name before. I have something I need to apologize to you for. I opened my eyes wide in response to her unexpected words. There in front of me was the face of the woman I'd been smitten with that day. When we met on the mountain, I think her makeup had all but melted away due to sweat, leaving her almost barefaced. Today, Laura had her makeup neatly done and seemed like a professional woman. What do you mean? Suddenly, I was thrown into confusion by her change in attitude. In my dream, I was scolded by him. Her late husband appeared in her dream, apparently scolding her for her disrespectful behavior towards me. It seemed she was repeatedly urged to forgive my mentor, Bob. I thought about it when I woke up. I was immature. I sort of ran away without even thanking you for saving my life. Thank you for that time, she said a bit bashfully and deeply bowed to me. I somehow felt embarrassed and acted awkwardly. If you have time, I would like to treat you to lunch. I owe you an apology for many things. As I nervously responded, Laura proposed this. Of course, I readily agreed. Laura smiled happily and said, "I'm glad," upon hearing my response. She went back to her work after we decided to meet up at the entrance. Steve, watching me entranced by her, rolled his eyes. The presentation to the company was a great success, and it was decided we would receive financial support. It seems they'll also provide us with gear. It's truly a blessing. I deeply appreciated Steve's effort. Laura arrived a bit late to the entrance where we decided to meet. I'm sorry, I was tied up with some work stuff. I was again taken aback as she runs up, panting. I guess she's just my type. I've never felt like this in my life before. The place Laura had reserved was a restaurant serving Nepalese cuisine. It seems it was her late husband's favorite restaurant. The dal soup with spices, herbs, and beans was also my favorite, so I was genuinely happy that she chose this restaurant. He used to bring me here a lot. He said he would eat this in Nepal as well. He used all kinds of ways to try to take me to the mountains. She smiled a little sadly as she remembers her late husband. Thinking about Laura's feelings makes my heart ache a little. Did you have some business with that company after coming down from the mountain? When asked by Laura, I told her that they've become our corporate sponsor. I informed Laura that I would be challenging Denali next. She frowned a little at that. Denali, it's been a while since I've heard that. It's a mountain that every climber longs for. She must have heard it numerous times from her husband. Perhaps even Laura's husband had expressed his desire to challenge Denali. I'm sorry. Without thinking, the words of apology slipped out. At my words, Laura's eyes widened in surprise. And then, in the next moment, her eyes narrowed in a smile. "Don't be silly. There's nothing to apologize for." With a tone like she was talking to a child, I found myself feeling somewhat diminished. I'm not a child who can't understand what he said in his dreams, but hatred and forgiveness are complicated things. Laura said that she understood this in her head. No one was at fault. But she can't stop the feelings of hatred. Forgiving is even more difficult. Living is quite a tough task. Laura sighed softly. For the first time, I felt like I touched the folds of a human heart. It was delicate, complex, and sometimes troublesome, but it felt like evidence of being human. Perhaps you don't have to forgive. That's the general public's opinion, not necessarily how you feel, right? I wasn't sure if I should say such a thing. But I couldn't not say it. There's no need to conform to a certain mold. You can hate when you feel hatred. Forgive when the time comes to forgive. I think that kind of freedom should be allowed. A distressed image of my senior, Bob, crossed my mind, but these words were my true feelings. It's just absurd to suppress feelings in order to fit in the stereotype. Yes, thank you, I feel a lot better. As she said that, Laura's face seemed to lighten, like a weight had been lifted off her. As we said goodbye, Laura reached out her hand for a handshake. I firmly gripped her slender hand in return. She didn't say a word, but I felt like her hand was saying, "Come back alive." I met Laura again a year and a half after that day. My attempt at Denali had ended in failure. Bad weather played a part, but the mistake was mine. It would be fair to say that it was a desperate retreat. In the continuing bad weather, I dug a snow cave and endured. If rescue had come even a day later, I don't think I would have survived. When I woke up in the hospital, flown in by helicopter, all medical procedures had been completed. I had 2 toes and my right little and ring fingers amputated due to frostbite. When I heard about the procedure, I didn't feel despair. I just thought that I could still climb. It might sound stupid, but that's really what I thought. The first thing I did today, after finishing my treatment and finally returning to the States, was to look for a hamburger shop. I just wanted to have American food, and I couldn't help it. I ordered cheeseburger at an old, traditional restaurant. After one bite, I felt like crying. I felt like I had finally come home. Next, I went to see Laura. I knew where her flower shop was before leaving the States. Not wanting to disturb her work, I waited at a nearby cafe until her shop closed. I could see Laura working. I think spending my afternoon absent-mindedly watching Laura going about her daily routine, a life I knew nothing about, was a luxury. In line with the closing time of the flower shop, I left the cafe. And then, I eagerly waited outside the flower shop for Laura to come out. Laura. After making sure she had pulled down the shutter and locked it, I called out to her quietly. Sitting on the guardrail on the sidewalk, I waved to her. Laura was genuinely surprised. "What, Jake, really?" She put her bag down in front of the shutter and ran over to me. I jumped off the guardrail and extended my right hand to her. The right hand she had extended to me when we said goodbye. I thought it was my turn to offer it this time. When Laura ran over to me, she took a sharp breath as she looked at my face. The signs of severe frostbite were still very visible on my face. It was in a pretty bad shape. Even a part of the top of my ear was missing. On top of that, my right hand was still wrapped in bandages. It was obvious something had happened. "I'm back, Laura." Seeing my outstretched right hand, Laura seemed to understand everything. Her face crumpled and she looked down. She probably remembered her late husband. "I'm back." I say it one more time, looking into her face and smiling. There's no reason for you to say I'm back to me. Laura says that, batting away my right hand. Her voice trembles slightly. I know it's selfish, but I think the reason I survived and came back was because I felt like I had to say I'm home to you. Inside the snow cave, each time I felt like I was losing consciousness, I remembered Laura's face as she arranged flowers with such concentration. Even about the first time we met on the mountain. Again and again, I kept remembering Laura. And I thought, I want her to smile. Her sad face, her angry face, her troubled face, they are all lovely, but I want to see Laura's smiling face. When I say I'm home, I want her to say welcome back as if it's the most natural thing in the world. You say the same thing. He used to say the same thing. As Laura let out a small sigh along with her words, she slowly lifted her face to look at me. She looked at me as if she was searching for something. She probably wanted to know my true feelings. I think the one who taught me about being human was you when all I thought about was the mountain in the past. The only one who can fill the void in me as a human is you, probably. I was a bit embarrassed and my voice trailed off towards the end, but that's how I really feel. Will you fill the void in my heart? At Laura's words, I nodded enthusiastically and picked her up like a child. I'm home, Laura. When I put my forehead to hers and said that, Laura chuckled. Welcome back, I'm glad you're safe. Laura's smile was clear like glass, and it was the kind of smile that made me feel like I had to protect her forever. A few years later, I challenged Denali once again and succeeded. From the summit, I made a call via satellite phone to report my successful climb. The one receiving that call was Laura, waiting for me at the base camp. Remembering her smile as she enthusiastically said she'd be the first one to say welcome back. I'll be back soon. I said that at the end of the call. On the other side of the phone, Laura answered with a yeah.